It was the summer of 2004, at a forward operating base near Fallujah, where the dust had the consistency of powdered glass and the sun beat down with a kind of biblical fury. For a young sergeant in a maintenance platoon, the war wasn't about grand strategy or geopolitics. It was about a single stubborn bolt on the transmission housing of an M1114 up-armored Humvee. His world had shrunk to the space between his wrench and that piece of metal. The vehicle was down, deadlined as they called it. Its crew, a team of infantry scouts, were now forced to run patrols in a soft-skinned truck, a thin-doored pickup with little more than canvas between them and the roadside bombs that had become the enemy's favorite weapon. The sergeant knew exactly what he needed: a new transmission assembly, national stock number 2520-01-447-8411. A simple request. He walked from the searing heat of the motor pool into the air-conditioned hum of the supply tent. There, a specialist sat in front of a ruggedized laptop, tapping the request into a brand new, state-of-the-art logistics system. This was the system they were told would change everything. A digital pipeline that connected this dusty corner of Iraq directly to the vast supply depots in Kuwait, in Germany, in the United States. No more lost paperwork. No more frantic phone calls. Just clean, efficient data. Total asset visibility. The computer accepted the request, a small green checkmark offering a silent promise of efficiency. And then, nothing. A week passed. The sergeant checked again. The system showed the part was being processed. Another week. The infantry team in the soft-skinned truck had a close call, an IED detonating just 100 yards behind them, close enough to blow out their tires and shatter their nerves. The sergeant filed the request again. The supply specialist, face tight with frustration, tried to track the original order. The system, this multi-billion-dollar oracle, told him a story of baffling complexity. The part was in a shipping container in Kuwait. Then it was in a warehouse in Qatar. Then the order status simply vanished, erased into the digital ether. It existed, and then it didn't. It was everywhere, and it was nowhere. The sergeant, covered in grease and grit, was fighting a ghost in the machine, and his soldiers were paying the price in blood risk every single day. This scene, or one very much like it, was not an anomaly. It was the norm. Across Iraq and Afghanistan, the most technologically advanced, most lavishly funded military in human history was being slowly, grindingly paralyzed by its own supply chain. It was a quiet crisis, a story not of battlefield heroics, but of crippling inefficiency, a story written in maintenance logs and unanswered supply requisitions. At the height of the wars, tens of thousands of vehicles, Humvees, MRAPs, transport trucks, the very backbone of the ground war effort, were sitting idle, waiting for parts. An army of mechanics became masters of cannibalization, stripping working parts from one broken vehicle to get another running for a few more days, a practice that created a cascade of new shortages. Warehouses in the United States were filled to the brim with parts that were desperately needed 10,000 miles away, but the system designed to connect them had become an invisible labyrinth. Mountains of material, tires, engines, armor kits, electronics, would arrive in theater only to be lost, dumped in sprawling, uncatalogued yards under the desert sun, their shipping labels rendered unreadable by the sand and heat. This was not a failure of will or a lack of resources. It was a failure of a grand vision. A monumental $7 billion bet on a new way of war, a bet that went catastrophically wrong. And to understand how this happened, how the army broke its own logistical spine, you have to go back. Back to the end of the Cold War and the heady, optimistic days of the 1990s. With the fall of the Berlin Wall, the United States military found itself a titan without a peer competitor. The massive force built to confront the Soviet Union in the plains of Europe seemed to many in Washington like an expensive relic. The era of the peace dividend began, marked by deep budget cuts and a fundamental rethinking of what an army was for. The army that had triumphed in the First Gulf War was a powerful but cumbersome beast. Its logistics were a product of the 1970s and 80s, a sprawling, disconnected patchwork of dozens of different computer systems known as STAMIS, the Standard Army Management Information Systems. These were the green screen command line dinosaurs of the early digital age. Each system managed its own little fiefdom, one for ammunition, one for spare parts, one for medical supplies, one for fuel. They rarely spoke to each other. Getting a complete picture of the supply chain required phone calls, faxes, and couriers carrying floppy disks. It was slow, labor-intensive, and prone to error. But for all its faults, it had one overriding virtue. People understood it. Generations of supply sergeants and warehouse foremen had learned its quirks and idiosyncrasies. They knew who to call, what paper form to fill out, and how to work around the system's flaws to get the job done. It was a system built on human knowledge and relationships as much as on computer code. But in the corridors of the Pentagon, a new gospel was being preached. It went by many names: the revolution in military affairs, transformation, network-centric warfare. Its chief evangelist was the new Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld. The core belief was that information technology was on the verge of changing the very nature of conflict. Future wars would be won not by mass and attrition, but by speed, precision, and information dominance. The goal was a leaner, more agile military where every soldier, every vehicle, every sensor was a node on a vast digital network. A commander, it was said, should have a god's eye view of the battlefield, with perfect real-time knowledge of both friendly and enemy forces. This philosophy of transformation was not limited to the battlefield. It was aimed squarely at the unglamorous behind-the-scenes world of military logistics. The Pentagon looked to the private sector, to corporate giants like Walmart and Federal Express, and saw a model of efficiency to be emulated. These companies had mastered the art of the global supply chain using a powerful tool called Enterprise Resource Planning, or ERP software. An ERP system promised to do for a massive organization what the old STAMIS systems could not: integrate every single aspect of the business into one unified, all-knowing database. From the factory floor to the checkout aisle, every item could be tracked, every process optimized. The promise was irresistible. Imagine applying that power to the US Army. A single system that could manage everything from a soldier's payroll to the global inventory of M1 Abrams tank engines. A supply sergeant in a remote outpost could order a part, and the system would automatically find the nearest one, arrange its transport, update the inventory, and even bill the correct unit. It was a vision of perfect, frictionless logistics, a digital mirage of total control. This was the dream that gave birth to the Logistics Modernization Program, or LMP. The Army would sweep away the tangled mess of its legacy systems and replace them all with a single commercial, off-the-shelf ERP system from the German software giant SAP. It would be one of the largest and most complex information technology projects ever attempted. The cost was estimated in the billions, but the projected savings from efficiency were said to be in the tens of billions. It was a future sold to Congress and the public as a fiscally responsible, technologically sophisticated leap into the 21st century. The Army was going to be run like a Fortune 500 company. The problem, which no one seemed to fully appreciate, was that the Army is not a company. Its business is not profit, it is war. Its supply chain doesn't end at a climate-controlled distribution center. It ends in the mud and dust of a combat zone, in the hands of a tired sergeant trying to fix a broken vehicle so his friends don't have to die. And this fundamental disconnect between the clean, orderly world of corporate software and the chaotic, violent reality of warfare was a crack in the foundation of the entire $7 billion enterprise. A crack that was about to be tested under the immense pressure of a decade of relentless war. To understand the scale of the failure, you first have to understand the scale of the machine. Not the computer, but the actual physical machine of the United States Army at war. It is an organism of incomprehensible appetite, a beast of steel and fire that consumes oceans of fuel and mountains of supplies every single day. The promises made in the clean rooms of software developers and the polished halls of the Pentagon were about to collide with this gritty, kinetic reality. And the currency of this reality wasn't data packets and processing cycles. It was tonnage and gallons, calories and ammunition. Let's start with the basics. A single soldier deployed in a combat zone like Iraq or Afghanistan. In the sterile language of logistics, this soldier is a daily requirement. He requires at minimum 3,000 calories to function, and in the exertion of combat, this can easily spike to over 4,500. This is the energy of 3, sometimes 4 MREs or meals ready to eat. Each one a dense, vacuum-sealed brick of sustenance. He requires water, not just for drinking but for survival in a desert climate that can boil a man in his own armor. The planning factor is 5 gallons per soldier per day. Then comes ammunition. A basic combat load for an M4 rifle is 210 rounds, but in a sustained firefight a soldier can burn through that in minutes. Add grenades, batteries for radios and night vision, medical supplies. Now multiply that. Multiply it by a platoon of 40, by a company of 200, by a battalion of 1,000. Now, imagine a full armored brigade combat team, nearly 4,700 soldiers. That's over 18,000 meals, nearly 24,000 gallons of bottled water, and literally tons of ammunition, every single day, just to keep the human component of the machine running. This river of basic sustenance has to flow, uninterrupted, from a port in Kuwait or a Bagram airfield, across hundreds of miles of hostile territory to a dozen different forward operating bases. But the soldiers are only the operators. The true god of this battlefield is fuel, specifically JP-8, a kerosene-based jet fuel that the Army standardized to run almost everything, from its generators to its tanks. And the most voracious consumer of this fuel is the M1 Abrams main battle tank, a 70-ton behemoth of layered composite armor and raw power. The Abrams is powered not by a diesel engine, but by a 1,500 horsepower Honeywell AGT 1500 gas turbine. It's an engine closer to what you'd find on a helicopter, and it gives the tank its incredible speed and distinctive, terrifying whisper. It also gives it a prodigious thirst. At full throttle, an Abrams can burn through 10 gallons of JP-8 in the time it takes to start the engine and lurch forward. Its mileage isn't measured in miles per gallon, but gallons per mile. On a good road, it might get half a mile to the gallon. In the soft sand and rugged terrain of the Middle East, that number plummets. A single armored brigade has 87 of these tanks. Alongside them are 150 Bradley fighting vehicles, 18 Paladin self-propelled howitzers, and hundreds upon hundreds of other trucks and armored carriers. The daily fuel consumption for a single brigade on the move can exceed 500,000 gallons. 500,000 gallons of JP-8 that has to be trucked, day in and day out, down roads seeded with improvised explosive devices. This is the tyranny of the supply line. Every gallon of fuel, every case of MREs, every box of 5.56 meter ammunition begins its journey thousands of miles away. It crosses an ocean on a massive cargo ship, is offloaded in a secure port, and then begins the most dangerous part of its journey, the long haul by ground convoy. The workhorse of this effort is the Heavy Expanded Mobility Tactical Truck, the HEMTT, a 10-ton, 8-wheel drive monster that can be configured as a cargo carrier, a fuel tanker, or a wrecker. These trucks, along with countless other civilian and military haulers, formed the lifeblood convoys that snaked across the landscape. They were the #1 target. An insurgent didn't need to defeat an Abrams tank in battle. He just needed to blow up the fuel tanker 300 miles behind it. The tank would eventually grind to a halt, becoming nothing more than a 70-ton steel pillbox. And then there are the parts, the hidden, unglamorous world of Class 9 repair parts. This is where the old labyrinthine system lived, and where the new SAP system was meant to bring order. An Abrams tank has over 2,000 individual parts that are tracked and managed. Its track is made of 156 individual track pads, each one subject to incredible wear and tear. A road wheel can be shattered by an IED. A sensitive thermal sight can be knocked out of alignment by a hard jolt, and the turbine engine, for all its power, is a delicate instrument that ingests sand and dust, requiring frequent, complex maintenance and complete replacement after a certain number of hours. An AGT 1500 engine is a multi-ton component that costs over $1 million. When one fails in the field, a maintenance unit has to order a replacement. Under the old system, a supply sergeant would use a clunky green screen computer running a program like the Standard Army Retail Supply System, or SARS-S. He'd type in a 13-digit national stock number for the engine, the system would process the request, and somewhere deep in the logistical chain, a message would begin its journey. The problem was, the system was a black box. The sergeant knew he had ordered the part, but he had no idea where it was. Was it at the main depot in Balad? Was it still in Kuwait? Was it sitting on a pallet in a warehouse in Pennsylvania? The system couldn't tell him. This was called a lack of in-transit visibility, and it was the central problem the new logistics modernization program was designed to solve. In the SAP system, every part would be tagged, tracked, and visible at every step. A single unified database would show the sergeant in real time that his engine had just been loaded onto a C-17 Globemaster at Dover Air Force Base, that it had landed in Qatar and was now manifested for the next convoy north. It was a beautiful, logical, and utterly rational vision. It was also a fantasy, because the system assumed a perfect world that did not exist. It assumed stable satellite connections in a valley surrounded by mountains. It assumed a supply clerk had the time to meticulously navigate a complex graphical user interface while mortars were landing nearby. It assumed the physical world of shipping containers, forklifts, and exhausted soldiers would conform to the pristine digital architecture of the software. The system designed to manage the predictable flow of widgets from a factory in Germany to a warehouse in Ohio was now being asked to manage the desperate, chaotic flow of tank engines and blood plasma into a war zone. The digital mirage was about to evaporate in the heat of the desert. The first casualties of this digital war were not men, but numbers. They were the 13-digit stock codes that vanished into the ether, the requisition forms that flagged as pending for weeks, the shipping manifests that swore a container held life-saving medical supplies, when in fact it held nothing but pallets of printer paper. For the soldier on the ground, these were not abstract data errors. They were the harbingers of a new kind of hardship, a technologically induced misery that felt both absurd and deeply personal. It was the feeling of being abandoned not by your comrades, but by an invisible wall of code. For Sergeant Kevin Miller, a Bradley fighting vehicle mechanic at a dusty forward operating base in the Peak River Valley, the failure began with a sound. It was the high whining shriek of a dying hydraulic pump on his platoon's lead vehicle. A simple fix, in theory. A part he'd swapped out a dozen times back at Fort Hood. He logged into the new SAP portal, the one they'd all received a week of death by PowerPoint training on. The interface was clean, modern, a world away from the old green screen block text. He found the part, entered the priority code, and hit submit. The system gave him a tracking number and a comforting green checkmark. Order submitted. For 2 days, that's all it said. On the third day, his platoon sergeant asked for a status update. The Bradley was the eyes and ears of their patrols. Without it, they were half blind. Miller logged in. The status hadn't changed. Order submitted. He called the support desk at Bagram Airfield. A contractor with a bored voice told him if the system said it was submitted, it was submitted. There was no one to call, no number to check. The system was the single source of truth. But Miller's truth was the 300-ton metal beast sitting silent in the motor pool, useless. On the 7th day, a patrol went out without the Bradley and hit an IED that its advanced optics might have spotted. 2 men were wounded, 1 seriously. The anger in the motor pool was thick enough to taste. The system still said, "Order submitted." Finally, Miller and his chief did what soldiers have always done when the system fails them. They broke the rules to survive. Under the cover of darkness, with a set of scavenged tools, they stripped the same hydraulic pump from a deadlined vehicle that was waiting on a new engine. An engine that, according to the same flawless system, was also submitted. The digital ghost in the machine was now forcing them to create a graveyard of real ones. While Sergeant Miller fought the system for a machine part, hundreds of miles north in the snow-dusted mountains of Kunar province, a platoon from the 10th Mountain Division was fighting a more ancient battle, the cold. Their small combat outpost, or COP, was perched on a ridgeline, supplied only by helicopter. Before the winter set in, their supply officer had put in a massive order for cold weather gear, new Gore-Tex jackets, insulated boots, thermal underwear, gloves. The new logistics program processed the order flawlessly. In the massive depot at Bagram, a container was packed, manifested, and the digital record was updated. The system showed COP Keating had received a full winter issue for 150 men. A box was checked, a requirement was met. But the container that arrived on the Chinook was not the container from the manifest. It was filled, inexplicably, with summer uniforms and mosquito netting. A clerical error somewhere, a forklift driver's mistake, a label slapped on the wrong box. In the old days, the supply sergeant would have gotten on the radio and raised hell until the right gear was on the next flight. But now, when he tried to reorder, the system blocked him. Requirement already fulfilled, the error message read. According to the immaculate, all-knowing database, his men were already warm. He could not order what the system insisted he already had. For a 19-year-old private first class from Florida, on his first deployment, the reality of that data error was the feeling of his toes going numb inside his cracked summer boots. It was the endless shivering nights on guard duty, wrapping himself in a poncho liner that did little to stop the wind that sliced through the mountain passes. It was watching older sergeants teach the new soldiers how to wrap their feet in plastic bags to keep the dampness out, a trick from a bygone era now resurrected by $1 billion software suite. The men shared a single pair of winter gloves, passing them from guard post to guard post like a holy relic. They burned broken ammo crates for warmth, huddled around the sputtering flames, while somewhere in a climate-controlled server farm in Virginia, a line of code declared them perfectly equipped for the alpine winter. They were ghosts, shivering in a reality the machine refused to recognize. But the system's most lethal failure was its rigid, unforgiving logic in the face of chaos. It was a system built for the predictable world of warehouses and spreadsheets, not for the desperate improvisation of a firefight. In Helmand Province, a Marine patrol was ambushed in a dense green field of corn. Pinned down, taking fire from three sides, they did what Marines do. They fought back, pouring a disciplined volume of fire into the enemy positions. But the fight dragged on. A squad leader's voice came over the radio, strained and tight. "We are black on 556, out of ammunition." The platoon commander, a young first lieutenant, radioed his company headquarters, requesting an emergency ammunition resupply. This was a flash priority, the highest there is. In the old system, that call would have triggered a human chain reaction of frantic urgency. But now the request had to be formalized in the system. The company clerk, with rounds impacting the walls of the command post, had to log in, create a new material request, and enter the stock number for 5.56mm ammunition. But the system, in its infinite wisdom, saw that the platoon had just been issued a full combat loadout 3 days prior. Their projected ammunition expenditure, according to the system's algorithm, meant they should still have over 70% of their ammo remaining. The request was automatically flagged for manual review. It required a battalion-level signature, an override from an officer who was miles away, monitoring a different battle on a different screen. The lieutenant on the ground didn't care about data validation or expenditure algorithms. He cared about the terrifying silence that was beginning to fall over his position as his Marines' rifles clicked empty. He was screaming into his radio for bullets, and the answer he got back was about digital signatures. The system, designed to provide total asset visibility, could see the bullets sitting on the shelf at the main base, but it couldn't comprehend the visceral, immediate need for them a few miles away. It could not process desperation. It could not quantify fear. For the men pinned down in that field, the logistical failure wasn't an inconvenience. It was a death sentence, delivered by a progress bar and an error message. They were saved not by the $7 billion network, but by another platoon that broke through the ambush on foot, carrying belts of ammunition on their backs, a human solution to a digital problem, the oldest form of logistics there is. The system had promised to connect the battlefield to the warehouse in real time. Instead, it had severed the connection, replacing a lifeline with a labyrinth. This single story, of men saved by the sweat and courage of their brothers, became a parable whispered in briefing tents and dusty outposts. It was the first crack in a dam of immense hubris. The system had been built on a powerful and seductive promise that through total information awareness, the chaos of war could finally be tamed, that the fog and friction that had haunted commanders since the dawn of time could be burned away by the clean, clarifying light of data. But in that field, under the weight of enemy fire, the system revealed its own deeper truth. It saw the world not as it was, but as it was supposed to be according to its own rigid logic. The soldiers were not men of flesh and blood, but data points. Their fear was not real, but an anomaly in the expenditure projection. Their impending deaths were simply a rounding error. This was the turning point. Not a single grand battle, but 1,000 small, grinding failures of logic and spirit. A medic's request for blood plasma rejected because the casualty reports for his unit hadn't yet been uploaded from the forward aid station. So according to the central server, no one was wounded. A convoy commander, his trucks filled with desperately needed water, unable to leave the wire because the system had flagged his route as suboptimal, and he needed a colonel's digital approval to take the shorter, more dangerous road that everyone on the ground knew was the only way through. Each incident was a paper cut, but together they bled the army's fighting ability dry. The warfighters on the edge of the spear were being tethered and ultimately strangled by a vast, unblinking and profoundly stupid machine that they were told was progress. The generals, insulated in their high-tech command centers, saw a different war. On their screens, the battlefield glowed with serene confidence. Icons representing platoons and companies were green, indicating full strength and supply. Logistics routes flowed like pristine digital rivers. They were winning a clean and efficient war on a map, but the calls that came crackling over the radio told a different story. A story of rage, of desperation, of commanders deliberately unplugging their terminals and reverting to grease pencils and runners, a high-tech mutiny born of necessity. The moment of climax came not with the roar of a cannon, but with the quiet admission of a 4-star general in a classified briefing. He pointed to a screen showing perfect, orderly supply chains and said to a room of stunned officials, "None of that is real. We are fighting a phantom war against ourselves." The order was given, quietly at first, then with increasing urgency: bypass the system. Trust the man on the ground. The aftermath was a great unwinding. The army had to unlearn a religion it had spent billions to adopt. Specialists were flown in, not to install new software, but to teach sergeants how to use paper ledgers again. They had to rediscover the ancient art of looking a man in the eye and asking him what he needed, rather than consulting a tablet. The scars of this failure were not just in the budget reports or the scathing congressional inquiries, they were written on the land itself. In the deserts of Iraq and the mountains of Afghanistan, you can still find them. Vast climate-controlled warehouses, the size of aircraft hangars, filled with silent monuments to the failed idea. Millions of barcode scanners, still in their plastic wrapping. Servers in black steel racks, holding data that no one would ever trust again. They are like the empty cities of a lost civilization, a testament to a people who believed they could conquer the world with an algorithm, only to be defeated by a misplaced comma in a line of code. These boneyards of technology are the most obvious scar, but they are not the deepest. The deepest scars are carried in the memories of the men and women who were forced to fight two enemies, the one in front of them with a rifle and the one behind them with a database. It was a wound of trust, the fundamental covenant between a soldier and his leaders, that when he is sent into harm's way, he will be given what he needs to fight and to survive, had been broken. It was replaced by a system that demanded proof of his suffering before it would offer relief. A system that would watch him die and then flag his account for unusual resource consumption. The land itself remembers this. The earth that soaked up the blood of men waiting for a digital signature holds that memory in its silence. The technology has rusted and faded, but the story remains, a ghost in the soil. In the end, we are left with a quiet and humbling wisdom. The effort to build this system was not born of malice, but of a uniquely American kind of hope. The belief that any problem, even one as old and as savage as war, can be solved with enough ingenuity and enough money. It was the belief that the human element, with its irrationality, its heroism, its panic, and its profound intuition, was a flaw in the system to be engineered out. But this was the great miscalculation. The human element is not the flaw, it is the entire point. The system failed because it could not measure courage. It could not calculate honor. It could not put a stock number on desperation. The $7 billion was the price of a lesson etched in blood and frustration, the lesson that the most powerful network on a battlefield will never be fiber optic. It will always be the simple, unbreakable bond between the soldier on the line and the one coming up the road behind him, carrying the bullets on his back.